Hi everybody, welcome to Our Worship Sound. My name is Peter, and today I want to talk to you about chord notation. And there are a couple reasons why I want to talk about this. And one is that we want to be able to take a chart that's in front of us and to be able to interpret the chords properly. And another reason is that if we're writing our own charts or writing our own chord sheets, we want to be able to communicate with other musicians in a good way. So to get down to it, let's start with a basic major chord. And if you see just a note name, that indicates a major chord. For example, B flat would be just the basic triad, 1, 3, 5. And to make it minor, all you have to do is put the M-I-N or lowercase m after the chord name. So you'd get B flat minor that way. So now for the alterations. If you want to add, or the arranger wants to add, the second scale degree to the chord, for example, take a C chord and add the D to it. There are a couple of different ways to write this, but it's important to know that they give different results. For example, if you want to simply add the 2 to the triad, to the 1, 3, 5, you just write C add 2. If, however, you see in a chart C2, that means that you need to play the second, but leave out the third. So with the C2, you just have the root, the second, and the fifth, 1, 2, 5. Okay, so two different ways of writing it that give two different results. The third is part of the chord, so we're going to move from the 2 to the 3. Now we're going to talk about the fourth. And somebody asked me recently in a comment, what about a C4 chord? Well, the answer to that is you actually wouldn't see that chord notated properly as a C4 chord. The way to properly do it would be to put in what's called a suspension, or a C sus4. And SUS in that case does stand for suspension and not for sustained, as some people say. But what a suspension is you take a note, as it would typically be here, the third, and you suspend it or you raise it half a step up. And that creates a tension which may or may not be resolved as the chord progresses. But what it means is just kind of like the 2, you're going to leave out the third, but suspend the third as the fourth. So that's what we would do with the fourth. A lot of times you'll see this on the dominant chord or the Roman numeral 5 chord. So within the key of C major, the 5 chord is going to be the G. So you might see G sus 4, which may or may not resolve to the regular G chord. Alright, so we've talked about seconds, thirds, fourths. Now we're going to talk about the fifth and what to do if you see a C5 chord. Now the 5 is already part of the triad, so we're not going to add anything. But just like the C2 chord, we're going to omit or leave out the third. So all you're left with in a C5 chord, or any 5 chord, is going to be the root and the fifth. And it creates this really open sound that's neither major or minor, because the major and minor is dependent on the third. But you have this open sound that sounds like a guitar power chord, and that's what a guitar power chord is. It's a 5 chord. So if you see a C5 or any other kind of 5 chord, leave out the fifth, and that's what you're left with. Okay, now a 6 chord, or a 6th, if you add a 6 to the chord, it's going to be unlike the 2 chord or the 5 chord, in that if you see, for example, C6, that means the same as C add 6. You're not going to omit anything. You're just going to add the 6 to the basic triad. So a 6 chord or an add 6 chord are going to give the same results. Now for the sevenths, and it gets a little bit more complicated with this. If you see a C7 chord, that's going to be in a major chord and add a minor 7th to it. And a minor 7th is going to be 2 half steps below the octave of the root. Okay, you can also do a C major 7 chord to indicate that B natural by adding an MAJ 7 after the chord. So you see that symbol. Also, if you ever see a triangle after a chord name, that's kind of a jazz shorthand for a major 7 chord, so same thing. Alright, so we've covered the major 7ths, the minor 7ths. Now a little bit about diminished chords. And a diminished chord indicates a flat 3rd and a flat 5th. So lower the 5th, lower the 3rd, and you're left with a simple diminished triad. And most of the time you're going to have a 7th with your diminished chord. And there are 2 different types of 7ths you could have with it. Okay. One is to add a minor 7th. We call that a half diminished chord. Okay, and that's indicated by a circle after the chord name with a slash through the circle. Another way to indicate this type of chord would be to say we're going to have a minor 7 chord, C minor 7 chord with a flat 5th. It's going to be the same thing as a half diminished chord, just a different way of communicating it. So we have a half diminished 7th, and we have the fully diminished 7th, and this is indicated by a circle with a 7 after it. So a C diminished 7 chord would have a diminished 7th. Diminished 7th is half step below the minor 7th. So you have the major 7th, minor 7th, and a diminished 7th. And this creates a chord where all the notes are 3 half steps or a minor third apart. If we look at it, we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And if we keep going with it, we have a symmetrical chord. So we end up with something that there are actually only 3 unique diminished 7th chords in music. If we call this a C diminished 7th chord, C sharp diminished 7, D diminished 7, and then once you get to that point, if you have an E flat diminished 7, you're basically playing an inversion of the C diminished chord. Now that we've covered diminished chords, we want to talk about upper extensions of the triad. So once we get past the 7th, we've got the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th. And those are all odd numbers. If we're talking about, for example, the 8, 12, and 14, those are just an octave above the triad. So we're talking about the 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th. The thing to know about these is that if you have, for example, 11th on the chord, a C11, that also is going to indicate the upper extensions below that number. So it's also going to indicate the 9th and the minor 7. So a C minor 7, C11 rather, would have the major triad plus the 7th, 9th, and 11th. A lot of times you'll see a composer or arranger put a 9 after a chord when all they really want is to add the 2nd. Okay, the 2nd is and the 9th are just the same note. The thing about the 9th is it also implies the 7th. It could be a minor 7th as in C9, or it could indicate a major 7th as in C major 9. The thing is, if you want to add the 2nd, that's all you're really after, you don't really have any specification about the 7th, it's best just to put C2 or C add 2 instead of putting a 9th on it, which also has other implications to it. So that's what you need to know about upper extensions. A couple of caveats to throw out about chord naming and notation is that sometimes you'll get somebody coming to you and they'll play something with a lot of notes in it, and they'll say, what's the name for this chord? And the thing is that chord names can change depending on their context, and it takes a certain level of theory understanding to be able to look at the chords in front of it and the chords after it, and to be able to explain it in some sort of context. And so the point isn't necessarily to put the proper name on a chord, but to effectively communicate it to other musicians so that they can play it when they need to. The other thing is that sometimes chords will be indicated in different ways to make them more easily understandable. An example of that would be a 13 chord. If we take a C13 chord, we take the triad, and the 13th is the A, but it also implies the 11th, 9th, and 7th, flat 7, minor 7th that is. Okay, so if I take out the triad, I'm left with this B flat D F A. That's also the same notes as a B flat major 7 chord. So to indicate that chord in a way that can be more quickly digested for somebody like me and to understand it and grasp it quicker is just to say B flat major 7 over C in the bass. And that helps. I recognize that much faster than I would recognize a C13 chord, or that's the process I would have to go through to get that chord down. So anyway, so hopefully understanding chord symbols and notation will help you communicate properly and also execute the notes in front of you, or the chords in front of you, more accurately. I hope that's been helpful. At this point, I'd like to encourage you and invite you to join me at ourworshipsound.com, sign up for the email list, and check out the free worship music downloads that are available there. Also join me through the other videos on the website or on the YouTube channel, as well as see what's going on with Facebook and Twitter. There's so much stuff in the works now, and you want to keep up with that. So in the meantime, I just encourage you to keep your worship authentic, original, and in a way that brings people together in a unified way. So thanks so much for your time today, and we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you.